The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And today we have with us Pastor Rob Paul, and we're talking about his message from this past Sunday. We're getting back into our Exodus the Way Through series. And this past Sunday, we talked about the promises of deliverance then and now. So welcome in, Pastor Rob.
Thanks. Good to be here. I feel like I've been gone for like a year.
Yep. We're still doing this in this room, if you didn't know.
Yep.
Things are still happening.
Yep.
You got to have some good vacation time.
Yeah. Yep. Monica and I went out west. We went to Yosemite National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, and Sequoia National Park. They're kind of close together. And the day before we left was when the government decided to shut down. So the national parks are run by the government. So we're like, this could be interesting.
Yeah. Well, at least you got in there when you could.
Well, it actually worked out really great. We have this, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, it's called Gypsy Tours. So you download this thing on your phone, and then it's got a satellite positioning thing. And when you hit these certain spots in the road, it triggers this guy to talk and tell you about what you're seeing or whatever.
Nice.
It's very, very freaky, actually. We've done it several times. It's like, if you look over to the left, you can see such and such, and you look to the left, and there it is. Or it'll say, you should slow down because there's a sharp turn coming up here, and it's dangerous, and if you miss it, you'll go over the edge and die. But and it's just right on. It's like the guy sitting in the car with you. But there are several times when he would say, you're probably slowing down right now because of the traffic, and we're like, nope, because there's just a lot of people thought that it was, I don't know, a lot of people thought maybe they were closed but the parks were open. We never waited once to get in. A lot of the stuff was open in the parks that wasn't run by the government. The only thing really that was closed was like the visitor centers, which we like going to those because you learn about stuff, but we learned other ways. And so, but it was good.
But you had the guy talking on your phone, so
we learned a lot from the guy. Yeah, we called him Tom the Traveler.
Nice.
So we learned a lot. But we drove a lot because there's so much. The parks are gigantic. But the big things where we saw El Capitan and Half Dome at Yosemite. Then Kings Canyon. It was a giant canyon, and what I didn't know this, but it's deeper than the Grand Canyon.
Really?
And it's deeper and in some places wider. I mean, it's not as cool. It's beautiful, but it's different. Mm-hmm. And then we went to Sequoia to see the Sequoia trees, and those things are just amazing. Yeah. We saw one. I know this isn't why anyone's tuned in, but I'm just fresh in my mind. We saw the largest tree on the planet, and it's by volume, not necessarily the tallest, but it's the largest tree by volume, and it's called the General Sherman tree. And it's a sequoia, and it's like almost 300 feet tall, which is a whole football field. But the thing about it is it's just massive. It's like gigantic, 40-foot diameter of the trunk, and it's huge. And sequoias never stop growing, which I'm sure someday I'll make a spiritual parallel to that. But they never stop growing, and every year this tree grows enough to just take the new growth. It would be enough wood to build 6 to 7 new houses every year.
Well, when you said 300 feet, immediately what came to mind is downtown Columbus. I believe the Rife Center is 32 floors. Yeah. And so it would be pretty close to the same height.
Yeah. It's just, when you try to take a picture of it, you can't get it in unless you step way, way back, and then it looks small. But, you take a picture of it. Like we took a picture of me and Monica, and you can't even, the whole trunk is the background. It doesn't even see
bark.
Yeah, that's it. And they're just really incredible trees, and it was just, fun to be in God's creation like that. We really like being outside and stuff. So got a sunburn on top of my head because we had a sunroof and forgot to wear a hat while I had sunroof. So. Yeah. But it was great. We had a good time.
Well, past couple Sundays, we had Pastor Larry and also Pastor Kevin here in Gahanna, and it was kind of a nice little break. Yeah. But now we're back into Exodus, which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's such a good book, and we'll talk today a little bit about some of the parallels of the Israelites to us today. Mm-hmm. But just by way of a quick recap, we're talking. Really, this is mostly about Moses' life so far. In the first 40 years of his life, he grew up in Pharaoh's household, had the best of everything, food, education, all that. Beginning of the second 40 years of his life, he committed a murder trying to protect someone, becomes a wanted man and is a fugitive and leaves. In the next 40 years of his life, he spends in the land of the Midianites, and he's basically a shepherd. So he goes from living in the best of everything to living in the desert, and now he's taking care of sheep. And then at the end of that 40 years, when he's 80 years old, God calls him and says, Moses, I want to use you to lead my people out of bondage. And of course, he has this long conversation, lots of excuses why he couldn't and shouldn't do it. In the last message in the series, we talked about how God helped Moses to know that it was his will to do these things, and how God confirmed all of those things. And so now when we pick up in chapter 5, we're at the point where Moses and Aaron are together, and they're getting ready to go into Pharaoh. So they have all the confidence in the world that God's called them to do this, and they go into Pharaoh, and they say, listen, Pharaoh, it's the famous line, let my people go. And just like God said was going to happen, Pharaoh says, no, I don't think so. But This was no surprise to Moses and Aaron because God already told them that. And then Moses and Aaron are like, well, hey, listen, you got to let him go because something bad might happen to the people, and then you wouldn't have anything, you wouldn't have any workers. And Pharaoh's reply was, well, you're going to keep making bricks, and because you're such a lazy group of people and you want to go take a break, I want you to keep making bricks, and we're going to stop supplying straw for you to make the bricks. You got to go find it. And by the way, we're not going to reduce the quota. Yeah. So you got to keep making the same number of bricks. We're going to stop supplying one of the main ingredients, and you got to go find it. So now the people are scattered all over the place trying to get the straw to make bricks and everything. And they're like, the Israelites are like, this is crazy. And they go to Moses, and they're like, you got to help us here. So Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, you got to stop this. And Pharaoh says, no, we're not going to do it. And then all the people who are just a day or so ago, so excited about Moses coming as a deliverer, they go to Moses and Aaron, and they're royally ticked off, and they say, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. And like, those are like really bad words to hear. And the Living Bible actually says that the people swore at them. The Israelites were so mad at what Moses and Aaron had done is that, they're swearing at them. And so Moses is like, look, this isn't how this is supposed to go, God. Like, you told me to go and free the people. I know Pharaoh's going to give some resistance, but you never said anything about the people getting mad at me and swearing at me and all this other kind of stuff. And then Moses is like, is this why you sent me? And interesting side note, the first time that anybody ever asked God why something happened in the Bible is right here when Moses says, why is this happening? Why did you do this? Right. And I just think it's interesting. The translation basically is that, are you gonna keep your promises to me and these people or not? Like, why is this happening? And I know that if I were Moses, I would have been thinking things like, I figured that when I obeyed God, that things were going to go well, right? I mean, you're like, surely if I'm doing what God wants me to do, everything's going to go well. In fact, you gave me all kinds of confirmation. You gave me these miracles. You told me that people that hated me aren't in here anymore. I mean, I knew I was going to get a little bit of resistance, but this is like beyond all of that. This is beyond that. And I don't know if I know for myself, this has happened. And if you're listening today, if you've ever felt like when you were being obedient to the Lord and the result of your obedience seems like things got worse or better off. Like, that's happened to me a few times. It's like, I'm pretty sure God wants me to do this. And so I try it, and it's like, oh, things are worse off now than they were, right? And so Moses is kind of like, it was better when I was a shepherd talking to sheep than doing this kind of thing. And I think that it's interesting because that kind of puts a temptation in front of us. And the temptation, I think, is something that almost everyone faces when God asks them to do something, is that when the opposition comes, I can either doubt that I heard God correctly, and I can maybe just give up because I'm thinking, maybe I didn't hear right, or I can press on. And Sunday we were talking about this as we started the message off, and I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face when God asks us to do something for him is to focus on the circumstances around what's happening. Mm-hmm. And if we focus on the circumstances, it could lead us to doubt and eventually potentially even give up. Like, Moses literally says to God, he says, you have done nothing at all to rescue these people. And in the back of his head, he's probably thinking, did I miss it? Is this really what God, and then the devil comes in and he plays games. So like, the devil would say like, it's pretty audacious of you to think that God would ask you to do something like this. Did God really tell you to do this? Which, by the way, in the Garden of Eden, that's the same thing he said to Eve. Did God really say this? And so he plants these doubts in our minds, and he'll say things like, did you really think you had the abilities or the capacity or the resources or the leadership ability to lead all these people out of here? And he plants all these doubts in our mind. And I just want to say that I think it's really important to note that I hope there are people that are listening that God has asked them to do something. I think that's probably the case, that God has asked you to do something, right? Yep. And I just want to remind you that if you're being obedient to the Lord and he has called you to something that can make a difference, that we shouldn't be surprised when the enemy pushes back and makes things difficult. Like if we're doing something that literally has the potential to make a difference, a positive difference in the world, we should not be surprised when the enemy pushes back. And that's what's happened to Moses, right? And so what happens though is that when we get that pushback, we're like, oh, well, must be a sign from God that I'm not supposed to do this. Well, somehow in leadership, we have to figure out when is God really talking to me and saying to not do this, and when do I just need to recognize this as resistance from the enemy and push through? And that's where Moses is. And so Moses is like, am I really doing the right thing? And so he goes to God, he's like, is this how it's going to be? Right? And then in chapter 6, God reminds Moses of a couple of things. And I love the first thing that God says to Moses, like, I need you to focus on my identity and the promises that I've made you, and not the circumstances that are around you.
Yeah.
Because we could really do that. And so in verse 1 of chapter 6, God says, I just want to remind you that I'm Moses. He says that I'm God. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. I will show him my power, and he will let my people go. I will show him my power, and he will throw them out of this country. And so God just reminded him like, hey, Moses, listen, I know this isn't going the way you thought maybe it was going to go, but I just want to remind you I'm sovereign. I'm in control. I have authority here. Pharaoh is just a puppet. He's doing what I want him to do. I'm pulling the strings. Don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm in control. And then he says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but I didn't make myself known to them by name, the Lord, by my name, the Lord. And so what God was saying to Moses is that I'm about to reveal myself to you in a way that nobody else has ever seen. I'm about to reveal things to you about myself that you never knew and that the world has never known. And I would say that in my own life, as I have been leading before, when God asks me to do something and I step out, it's almost always above my capacity or my abilities, but I step out in obedience. The Lord reveals himself to me in ways I never would have known him had I not stepped out.
Right.
And this is what he's saying, like, I'm going to do this. He's like, I've revealed myself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and those guys, but I'm going to show you things that they didn't even know. And then when you read through the history of the Exodus, you see what God does, how he does these kinds of things. And then God reminds Moses just one more thing. He says, I just want to remind you of why I'm doing this. And it was two reasons. It was because I'm faithful to keep my covenant. And he goes all the way back and he says, I made a promise to these people. And he says that in verse 4, but in Genesis, is where the promise really is, that God made this promise that he was going to give them the promised land. So he's like, I made a promise to these people and I'm going to keep it. And then he said, I've heard their groanings. I've heard the cries of the Israelites. And so he's like, I'm going to take care of this. I said I was going to do it. I'm true to it. And I love this verse in Exodus 6:5. It says, I've heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians hold in slavery, and I have remembered my promise. And I love that part of the passage, because it almost like God remembered something. Is like, does the fact that he remembered something mean that he forgot it and he needed to be reminded of it? Yeah. And that's really not what the word means. It doesn't necessarily mean that he forgot something and he's just being reminded. It means that he's reminding Moses that he knows he made a promise and he's going to act on it. He's going to make good on this promise. And so Moses is like, oh, this is terrible. I don't know what I'm going to do. Did I miss this? And God's like, Quit looking at the circumstances. Look at me. Remember, I'm sovereign. I'm in control. Remember, I'm always faithful to do what I said I would do. I've heard the cries of these people, and I'm going to show you things about me that no one has ever known, and the world's going to know me in a better way. Excuse me. And I'm like, man, that's exciting, but probably also scary at the same time. Well, think that God's going to do those things.
I think there's a couple of things to pull out there is that, as we look back at the story and we know all the miracles that are about to happen here, it's easy for us maybe to see in hindsight, like, how could you doubt, God's going to do all these great things.
Yeah.
But when you're living through it at the time, Moses at this point doesn't even really know what God's capable of.
No.
I mean, the idea of some of the things that are going to happen that we know are in the story, like Moses would never even imagine that that's something that God could do or would do.
Yeah.
And
there are things he had never done before.
Right. So, I mean, I think there's that angle to keep in mind. And also one of the other things I was kind of take away from what you were just talking about is that there's been times when I felt like God was calling me to a particular thing, just like you described. Mm-hmm. And after the fact, if circumstances are causing you to doubt, I always have to remind myself, my circumstances aren't what called me to this.
Yeah.
Like it was God that called me to this. It wasn't my circumstances. So why would my circumstances make me doubt what the call was?
Yeah.
If my circumstances didn't give me the call, then how could circumstances take it away?
Yeah.
And it has to be from God, and he's the one that sustains it.
Yeah. Yep. It's good. It's good. Well, so Moses is getting a little bit of confirmation from God. And then he says, these are the things I'm going to do. But then God does something that's really interesting. And he makes 7 statements that can kind of be categorized into 4. And they all begin with the phrase, I will. And God says to Moses, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this. And these are things that had not been done yet, but he said he was going to do them. And it's interesting because these statements that God makes are a promise to Moses and to the people of what he's going to do. So God's literally just calling the shots. He's like, I'm going to do this. And then when this happens, don't be surprised because this is what I said I was going to do. But then the interesting thing is that as God is making these promises to Moses and to the people of Israel, they're really a foreshadow of the promises that he's making to all of his people, because the things that God's about to do for the Israelites in these promises, he does for you and I even still today. So it's interesting, while we are able to look at what God said he was going to do for the Israelites, these promises are like a gospel foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do for us. And so when we'll go through that tomorrow, but when we go through those 4 things, those things that God did for the Israelites are 4 things that Jesus does for us. And it was just a foreshadowing of it. So it's kind of cool how the Old Testament and the New Testament kind of parallel, and we can talk about those 4 statements that he made.
Nice. Well, we'll get into that tomorrow. I guess a little bit of homework assignment if you want to and you want to get ahead. We're looking in Exodus 5 and 6. Maybe see if you can pull some of those things out.
Yeah.
We'll get into that tomorrow. In the meantime, you can also go to shepnaz.org and check out everything that's going on at the church. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.